All right, sports fans, how's everybody out there doing? William Martin coming at you one more time here on YouTube with another edition of the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge Podcast. We're just about a month away from 2023's version of the NFL Draft as the anticipation is building in regards to who will be the first overall pick, along with what other trades, or what trades rather, will be made throughout the draft's proceedings. But one of the top focuses of this NFL draft, just like always, is going to be how many quarterbacks are going to be taken in the first round. And of course, when quarterbacks are taking high in the draft, teams are putting plenty of stock into them to be a centerpiece of their franchise for the years to come. But are there any real franchise quarterbacks in this draft? Now, I, like many people, expect there to be four quarterbacks taken in the first round of this draft. And I'm going to talk about the guys that more than likely are going to hear their name from the quarterback position on the first night of the draft. And you look at CJ Stroud, the young man out of Ohio State. He's 6'3, 218 pounds. And for me, in my opinion, any doubt as far as whether or not that Stroud was going to be a first round pick, to me, got put to bed during the Georgia game. You go back to that semifinal game for Ohio State in the college football playoff, and the Buckeyes were dealing with a slew of injuries. And it was CJ Stroud in the second half of that game that, put that offense on his back and said, I'm going to give my guys an opportunity to win this game. Of course, it didn't work out, but nonetheless, Stroud showed out. Stroud has a strong arm, and we knew that before that game. He has a lot of mobility and athleticism that was put on display versus that staunch Georgia defense. And of course, the skeptics of CJ Stroud are going to say, well, he played with a bevy of NFL talent at the wide receiver position. Some guys who have already gotten to the league, some guys that are going to hear their name called this year as well as next year. But nonetheless, CJ Stroud, to me, I think is a guy that can get it done. And because of that, it's either going to be the Carolina Panthers first or the Houston Texans second that will take Stroud. Even as talented as he is, I don't feel that he needs to start right away, maybe sit about 3 or 4 games. But with that said, I still do believe that he's probably going to be under center for week number one. But nonetheless, it's all about developing him and putting the talent around him. And for the case of CJ Stroud, whether it's the Texans or the Panthers, you can see the brain trust is already in place to develop a young quarterback such as him. So I definitely think the potential is there. Bryce Young, the youngster coming out of the University of Alabama, he's only 6 feet tall, a buck 94, soaking wet. But for me, and I talked about this last year, and watching him play at Alabama, I really do feel that he is the football equivalent to Steph Curry, being that baby faced assassin. He always has a smile on his face, but this guy is a stone cold winner, and he knows how to go out there and get the job done. Of course, there are going to be people that will, talk about his slight of stature, but for me, his physical stature is not scaring teams off because he's probably going to be first or second overall in this draft, and it's kind of flip a coin between both him and CJ Stroud. But you talk about Bryce Young. This guy has a solid NFL arm. He knows how to make the throws. He's very accurate, and he's a point guard at a quarterback position in the NFL. And I say that because he knows how to get that football out quickly. He's mobile enough, and he's more elusive than people want to give him credit for. And I think playing in the SEC helps because you're playing against NFL type talent on a Saturday basis. Not only that, we saw Bryce Young take some hits during his time at Alabama. Some of those hits, put him out of action a little bit this past season. But nonetheless, I think Bryce Young is ready to hold up to the rigors of being an NFL quarterback. Just like CJ Stroud, it's a scenario for me where it wouldn't hurt him to maybe sit 3 or 4 games to begin the season, just to help him get caught up to speed. But with that said, when you're playing at a school like Ohio State, such a Stroud, like this Stroud did, when you're playing at a school like Alabama, which is what Young did, you're playing alongside and against NFL talent consistently. So that I think lessens the gap, if you will, from making the jump from the college game to the pro game. But nonetheless, I do think that Bryce Young has some potential going forward for himself here in the NFL. Then you look at Will Levis, 6'3, 232 pounds, coming out of Kentucky. Of course, he transferred there from Penn State. And for a guy like Levis, he's built like a prototypical NFL quarterback, but the thing is, will he be able to consistently get it done on Sundays? Now, he did play through some injuries last year at Kentucky, but for me, I think the jury is still out because when I watch Will Levis play, to me, he's consistently inconsistent. And, some people may agree with me, some won't. That's fine. It's all good. But nonetheless, obviously, to be an NFL quarterback, you're going to need more consistency. So I do see Levis as a first round pick, but it is going to be one of those deals where he has to go to a team that has a strong quarterback room in play. And I talk about the quarterback room, a veteran quarterback, also your offensive coordinator, your quarterback coach. Somebody's going to have to work with him. And it wouldn't hurt for him to, just sit back and watch a little bit. And again, for him, it definitely is going to come down to what system and what organization rather takes him. And then finally, the last quarterback that more than likely is going to hear his name called on day one at the draft, Anthony Richardson, 6'4", 232 pounds, out of the University of Florida. He's a physical specimen. And because of that, you have some people that are comparing him to Cam Newton. I'll tell you like this, he didn't do the things on the football field collegiately that Cam Newton did from the physical attribute standpoint. I totally get it. You're talking about a guy who is a freak of nature. There are plenty of people who are in awe of what they saw Richardson do at the NFL scouting combine as far as his ability to throw the ball, mobility, agility, you name it. But the bottom line is when you put on the tape, can this guy get it done? And if you go back and watch Richardson's time at Florida, I know that there were coaching changes and I know that there had to get adjusted to different systems, but nonetheless, there was a lot of inconsistency there. And I say that because he made the easy look very hard at times while also making the hard look easy. So it's one of those, which camp are you out or are you in on Anthony Richardson? To me, I look at a guy that is still very raw as a quarterback. He's got to work on his mechanics, his footwork, very strong arm again, and the physical attributes make it easy for a team to go out and work with him. But nonetheless, you have to put the personnel around him in order to get it done. And I think it starts from the coaching standpoint, as well as having a veteran quarterback, somebody who can show him the nuances of the NFL game that maybe a coach or an assistant coach might not be able to get through to him. For me, with Richardson, he's going to be taken very high in this draft. And with that said, I still think whoever takes Richardson would really benefit from having that veteran quarterback. And I would say, you know what? Don't be afraid to even sit him for the entire year. Make 2023 his redshirt season, if you will, to allow him to get acclimated. That's probably not going to happen. But nonetheless, it's it's still something that should be thought of. I look at him, and for me with Richardson, it really comes down to which organization takes him and whether or not whoever takes him, will they rush him out there. Now, don't get me wrong. Richardson's probably going to be a top 10 pick. Whoever drafts him is probably going to play him early this year. And I think you are going to see some flashes. Why? Because the other teams around the NFL don't know what he can and cannot do yet. But once they get tape on him, once they figure him out, it's going to be that adjustment period for him. And will he be up for the challenge? With that said, I still think he could benefit or should benefit or would benefit from sitting maybe even possibly the entire upcoming season. So you look at these quarterbacks, and best case scenario for all of them, for Young, it's either going to be the Panthers or the Texans. And for Stroud, it's either going to be the Panthers or Texans. Obviously, the Texans are just sitting back waiting to see what Carolina does with that first overall pick after they made the trade with the Chicago Bears. I'll tell you like this: whichever one of those quarterbacks that goes to Houston, you've got yourself a first year head coach in D'Amico Ryans. Obviously, his focus is going to be on the defensive side of the ball. But if you look at how the Houston Texans were able to run the football last year, that is definitely going to benefit that young quarterback as he is getting acclimated. You also, are expected to get John Mechie back at wide receiver after he missed the entire year, his rookie campaign in 2022. So those are two positives, or three positives rather, going forward for whoever goes to the Texans. Whoever goes to the Carolina Panthers, you have a head coach in Frank Reich. I know it didn't work out for the second part of Reich's tenure with the Indianapolis Colts as their head coach, but nonetheless, he is a guy. Obviously, he played quarterback in the NFL for a long period of time. Then on top of that, he has a reputation for working with and developing young quarterbacks. So obviously, you have that going in your favor as well. On the flip side, for a guy like Will Levis, I'll tell you like this: I think the Commanders could be in play in the mid first round. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, the Seattle Seahawks, as well. And I say that because you look at the Bucks. Obviously, life after Tom Brady has begun. They're talking about publicly how they're committed to Kyle Trask. They brought in Baker Mayfield as well. Who's to say that they couldn't use a first round pick on a quarterback and let him sit at least here for year number one? The Seattle Seahawks do have two picks here in round number one. Of course, the first pick they got from the Denver Broncos for the Russell Wilson trade. That's number five. And then they have their own pick later in the draft. The Seahawks are sitting in a very interesting spot. They just signed Geno Smith to the extension, but it's a short term extension. So, with that said, you could still have Geno Smith as your starting quarterback for this year, even going into next year, and possibly groom his replacement. Just a possibility. Not saying that it's a guarantee for the Seahawks to do that. And then I mentioned the Baltimore Ravens, and I say it like this: we don't know what is going to come of the Lamar Jackson contract situation with the Baltimore Ravens. Do they use a first round pick on a quarterback and say, you know what, we're headed in another direction? I don't know. It's a possibility, but these are teams that could be in the hunt, if you will, for a potential young quarterback early on in his draft. For Anthony Richardson, a lot of people are talking about the Indianapolis Colts, fourth overall. Before the Las Vegas Raiders signed Jimmy G, there was a possibility of him going there. With the Raiders giving Jimmy G that money, I don't see that happening now. Could be wrong. And then the Seattle Seahawks. The Seahawks, of course, at number five. Would they take him there and sit him behind Geno Smith? I'm not sure, but more than likely, he's probably going to be headed to the Indianapolis Colts at number four, unless something changes between now and then. I will say this about this quartet that has the potential to get drafted in round one for this upcoming draft. I do think that the pro potential is the best for CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. Number one, because of their ability. Number two, because of the teams and situations that they're going to be placed in. I think situation is going to matter more in this draft to both Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. I'll tell you like this: regardless of who takes Anthony Richardson, the expectations are going to be high just due to the athleticism that he has shown during this draft process. But regardless of the position, we have seen numerous guys over the years who show off that athleticism, but when it's game time, they can't get it done. Sometimes front offices, just like fans around the NFL or sports in general, they get enamored by what they see a guy do, at the combine. And in this case, like I've said before, anybody can look good throwing a football when they're in t-shirts, and a pair of shorts and some sneakers, and it's just them and their one wide receiver out there, especially at their pro day when it's one of those scenarios where all of the routes that they're running are their favorite, go-to routes. So of course you're supposed to succeed. Just ask the New York Jets with how they fell in love with Zach Wilson several years ago. But nonetheless, it's got to be buyer beware. You got to do your homework, especially when you're taking a player that high, especially when that player is a quarterback, because you're expecting him to be a backbone of your franchise for at least the next decade. But with that said, a little bit less than a month out for this draft. Let's see how things work out. And let's see how things work out for these young quarterbacks in the National Football League. So, folks, that is going to wrap it up. And as always, I want to take this time out to thank you for tuning into the 300 Pounds of Sports Knowledge podcast here on YouTube. I want to take this time out to thank all of you fine folks out there for tuning in. And if you have not already, please feel free to subscribe to this channel. Now, if you're on Twitter, please feel free to follow me at 300 Pounds of Sports. And like I always say, if you follow me, it'll be my pleasure to follow you right back. There is also the sports discussion group on Facebook at the Sports Depot 365. Now you can check it out. Drop a line and be a part of one of the better sports debating sites going on social media. So once again, fine folks, my name is William Martin. I am signing off, and I'm saying take care and have yourselves a wonderful day.